Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Revolution. Here we are going to talk about Revolution of the Daleks. So this was the New Year's Day special that has recently shown, and for anyone who's concerned, we will be talking spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet and you would like to remain unspoiled, please log out and come back to this later when you've seen it. It's well worth watching, I think. All right, so with me are some excellent panelists, and I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in the order that I see them on the screen. So Marcia, why don't you go first?
Hi, my name is Marcia Franklin. I've been blogging at Confessions of a Neo-Whovian since 2011, and that's pretty much my street cred.
Cool. Zecca.
Michael Zecca. I've been watching the series since 1981. And I will say the Daleks are not my favorite Doctor Who monster. So Dalek stories really have to impress for me. A lot of them don't.
Cool. Kathy.
I'm Kathryn Sullivan. I've done a lot of essays back in the day. I now do essays in Chickstick Time Lords, Children of Time, a couple of The Outside In, and that's my creds.
Cool. Yes, my name is Stacey Smith, at Smith with the question mark. So I write Doctor Who analysis books with Graham Burke. I write under the name Robert Smith, but I recently changed to Stacey. I'm also the editor of many things, like Outside In series. And yeah, I do like the Daleks, so I guess we're off to controversy from the beginning. So actually, Zecca, why don't I ask you, why don't you like the Daleks?
Well, I think part of it is the way I was introduced to them. My first introduction to the Daleks was through the Target novelization of the Dalek invasion of Earth, so I knew what they looked like, but I didn't know what they sounded like. And that also, I think, is one of the stronger Dalek stories. And so I had a good start, and then when I actually saw them on screen, I was very disappointed.
And did you see them in the Daleks invasion of Earth? Or you saw it later?
I think the first one I saw on screen was probably Destiny of the Daleks.
That might explain it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just never was impressed with them. So
yeah, right. Marcia, what's your opinion on Daleks in general?
They're not a bad monster in general, but I'm awfully tired of them.
That's fair. Yep. Yeah, we do get a lot of them. Kathy?
They're the iconic villain, and they've been around a long time. So it's like, and the fact that the new series handles them a lot differently, and spoiler, it is scary with the previous New Year's episode and this one, the way they're actually handled. It's like, yeah.
And if I could, I wanted to jump off of Marcia's saying a little tired of them. I was also getting very tired of the Christmas specials. I know Christmas specials are a thing in Britain, and they also, because they're on Christmas Day and a thing in Britain, they're usually kind of fluffy. And I don't think that served Doctor Who well with most of the Christmas specials we've had. I'm really happy that Chris Chibnall has convinced him to move the specials to New Year's, where he can do some more serious storytelling. And I'm also happy that the Dalek stories in the Chibnall era have all been in the specials and not in the regular season. They've kind of not disrupted the flow of the season, which is nice.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I loved the Christmas specials. I was all in for them, but I actually agree it was good to make a change, and I think the New Year's changed. I think my biggest problem with the Christmas specials was they kept having to tie them into Christmas, and that's great until you run out of Christmas things to tie into, and then it becomes very tenuous, and you're like, okay, yes, there might be a little tiny connection to something, but yeah. So I find the New Year's is perfectly fine. You may go back to Christmas at some point in the future. I'd be fine with that too. Yeah, I mean, my take on the Daleks is similar to Kathy. I think they are super iconic. I mean, they haven't always been done well. I feel like there's some very, very poor Dalek stories, like the, evolution of the Daleks and, so on. But but I think on the whole, they do have a real power to them. And I think they stand very well for kind of metaphor for kind of, fascism and so on. And that's, something that's not totally out of the realm of what might be going on today. So which kind of leads me to my next point. So Revolution of the Daleks, how timely was this?
I actually felt like it was a pretty tenuous tie.
Mhm.
For me, the Daleks were kind of the background of this episode, and the using them as peacekeepers felt kind of shoehorned in at the same time that it felt a little too real. So it was kind of a weird balance there between this is too topical and this is shoehorned in, and it was a little odd to me.
Yeah, considering it was filmed last year, it predicted quite a bit, more than I expected it to be.
Weirdly prescient, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, ugh.
Yeah, I sort of feel like if this had been shown in like, like New Year's Day this time last year kind of thing, we would have gone like, oh, as if that's gonna be real or something. Like, I totally agree, Marcia. I think it's, it's both like, it feels a bit shoehorned in because I think they probably, at the time, that was like, that wouldn't have felt so shoehorned, I think, when they made it, because things have been moving pretty rapidly. And also it feels kind of off a bit because, it's out of sync. And yet, Kathy, you're right. It's totally predicting a lot of stuff that, like, yeah. So I was quite. I didn't know it was filmed like much earlier. I thought this was filmed quite recently, and I was like, wow, they're really handling some of the COVID stuff really well with like crowd scenes and so on. I was like, oh, magic of television. And then I read later, I was like, oh no, they did this much earlier, so it makes a bit more sense. Yeah. So what do we think overall of the episode?
Well, mentioning that it's New Year's, there was only one line in this episode that mentioned it was New Year's. Basically, when Graham and Ryan come to find Yes at the house TARDIS, and that's it. Yeah. So it could have been shown at any time during the season.
One thing I really appreciated about this story is that it is actually a sequel to last year's special.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is following up on things that we had in the season finale. It's following up on Arachnids in the UK. We've actually got ties back to several parts of Jodie's era here. Doing some follow-up on, and honestly, this is kind of like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. did this with one of the Avengers, I think with Avengers Ultron, which was, they did the cleanup after the fact of the big film, and the beginning of this story is really doing the cleanup of last year's special, and then has consequences.
Yeah, I guess that's the advantage when there's no Doctor Who during the year. You can just basically jump straight to the next episode. But I think the Christmas specials, the first one started with Christmas Invasion, which was, like Harriet Jones, there was Rose, there was, there was all the stuff that had been happening is just like, here's the next iteration. But then they moved away from that and they started being like, well, there's an audience that watches these specials that don't watch the regular show. Like there's quite a sizable ratings jump. But I think that this one, they probably can take it for granted that like, a vast majority of people watching this New Year's special watched last year's New Year's special, so it's reasonable to do that.
It's actually been 2 years since Resolution.
Oh yes, has it? Yes, you're right, because it was a series between.
We got Spyfall on New Year's.
Everything feels like it's happened for 10 years in the last year, so yes, time has no meaning anymore.
Yeah. I enjoyed this special more than I expected to. Usually I watch a new episode and it, I get all the endorphins and oh yay, I love Doctor Who, and then I watch it again because I need to take notes and write a review for my blog, and that's when I'd sit down and find the things that I nitpick about, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe this didn't quite make sense and whatnot, but I don't know if it was just the frame of mind I was in this year where I needed something to hang on to that was fluffy and happy, but I didn't come out of the second viewing really feeling any worse about it, which kind of amazed me. But I think mostly that was because I was focusing on it as a companion leaving story. That was the core of the episode to me. Because I knew that Graham and Ryan were going to be leaving at the end. And so kind of watching that happen was really interesting to me. And as a companion leaving story, I think this is probably my favorite of the new era.
Right.
Maybe ever.
There's a lot of little character pieces in the story, which are nice. As you said, Marcia, the Daleks are kind of a background piece to this story, but it's really more about the characters. And they not only were doing a great job all through the story of setting up Ryan's departure, they didn't just hit us out of the blue like, say, Tegan's or, you know, some of the other companions. From the moment we started with Ryan in the story, we saw it developing in that direction. Graham's was maybe a little bit more of a surprise, but they were also, there's some scenes between Jack and Yaz where Jack is kind of checking on Yaz. How are you doing with all this stuff that's been going on? How are you doing with the doctor having disappeared on you for 10 months? I've been there. You know, and that was a nice piece as well. They really were doing a lot of that characters. Likewise, Jack and the doctor were kind of checking in with each other a bit too. There really was a lot of that development across all 5 characters.
Yeah, I agree. I loved it. I think like Marcia, I was just like, oh my God, it's Doctor Who. Boy, did I need that right now. And so I was just like so happy. And, you know, and I think probably if I sat down and like nitpicked it for my next book or something, I would probably find all the flaws too. But I'm like, I had a great time. I really loved it. And yeah, Mike, you're right. It's like the character stuff was quite strong. I didn't know about companion leaving stuff, so I was like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I see how that makes perfect sense. So it didn't feel out of the blue to me, even not knowing it was coming. Yeah, I agree. I think they seeded that well, and it seemed about right. Like, yeah. I don't know if I was quite expecting Graham as well, but then it was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. So.
Yep, and I think we should follow that. Don had a question in the chat.
Yeah.
That said, why did they write out 2 companions? Is this a cost-cutting thing? I like having more than one companion at the same time. I know in the case of Tosin Cole plays Ryan that he actually got an American television series, a lead role. So I can see why he was jumping ship. And then with Bradley Walsh, I think it's just the fact of his age. After 2 years doing the show, he's having fun, but it was tiring him out a bit.
He got another show too, though.
Yeah. So combination, it was time for him to go. And you can kind of see, okay, the relationship thing. You can see that moment toward the end of the story where Graham has to make the choice. Do I keep going with the doctor or do I stay home with Ryan? And he decides to go with the family connection. And that kind of makes some logical sense.
I think it makes a lot of logical sense, actually. It'd be very strange to kind of have Graham without Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those of us that watch Doctor Who through streaming services rather than, because I buy my through Amazon, I don't watch them on BBC America, so I have a 14-hour lag or something with the rest of you. They have teased us about a new companion that will be joining Yaz next season. So we're not going to be down to a solo companion, Don. We'll have 2 next season.
And that's the end of the BBC America showing too.
Yeah,
which meant I was rather disappointed because I want some episodes with just Yaz and the doctor.
I agree.
But I think somebody had said in one of the news groups that they might have been worried about it leaking, so they decided to announce it early.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's hard to keep a lid on things for months. So yeah, I know. I agree. I like Yaz and the doctor. I think that'd be a cool combination. But I think also kind of just for general dynamics and stuff like that, like probably like you want a mix of genders and stuff, so it sort of makes sense. Like when the doctor was a man, we never had really 2 male, like just a male companion and stuff. So
Planet of Fire, we really didn't get a long time before Perry was picked up, so we could have had a Turlo and
that's right, we could have, and Big Finish does and stuff like that, but like it's just I just feel like for just for a television show, like you're probably just not going to get it in reality, whatever we may want. So I'm fine. I mean, I like if they hadn't put the announcement on, I would have just assumed that there was going to be a new male companion pretty soon. That's just the way it goes.
I would have been.
And I like that they went for an older male companion with the next companion they're doing as well.
As opposed to Graham.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, we're not quite as old as Graham, but I mean, we're not going for super young. We're
but you're still getting the age range where people will be going, oh, is this going to be romantic interest for the doctor? Please no, please no.
Yeah, but from that clip I got, I mean, it's just me, but I got the feeling that this fellow is a recently divorced fellow with a teenage daughter. I don't know why, but I just get that impression from things. It's just like this I don't know. So we don't necessarily have to go with relationship shows up in the show, but we might be able to have some family connections that way.
I mean, Kathy, to pick up on your point when you're like, oh, please no relationship with the Doctor, I found it really interesting that the way they did Jack and the Doctor was very chaste. And I like that a lot because, you know, like when Jack thinks that Graham's the Doctor in Fugitive of the Jejune, like first thing he does is like kisses him without asking, which is not okay. And, you know, would be even less okay, I think, if it's, you know, Jack and Jodie kind of thing. And so like I'm glad they played that down. Like, you know, they had this great hug and that's perfect. And you're like, yes, they should be hugging. Like, that's lovely, right? It should not be this kind of like, I'm just going to kiss you kind of stuff. I mean, the comedy for Graham, yeah, sure. Like, I understand why it's there, but like, it's still, you know.
Yeah. But it actually shows a little bit of growth on Jack's part because he's been working to get to her cell for 19 years.
Yes.
He's actually thinking about maybe how the Doctor's going to react instead of just assuming, oh, everything's fine.
Right.
Yes, because there was a comment in the chat saying if it was 10 months for the companions, was it longer for the Doctor in the prison? The answer is yes, quite a bit longer. It was 19 years.
Well, it was a minimum of 19 years.
Minimum,
Jack took 19 years to get to the cell next door, but
How long did it
much
take
longer
before
before
he
that
found
was the
out?
Doctor there?
Yes.
So she could have been there for many decades.
So what do we think about the Doctor in prison for all this time? Why didn't she escape?
She needed to work things out. She really needed to just think about how everything is going, because I kept having the feeling that when she wanted to break out, she was going to break out.
Yeah, we had that conversation, I think, on the Timeless Child panel the other night, that she could have broken out anytime she wanted to, but she had a lot she was trying to process. The whole being the Timeless Child thing, you know, it broke Sasha Dewan's master, and it really messed with her. And she's even in this story, she's still questioning who she is. And then she has that moment of revelation late in the episode of, oh, I know who I am. I'm the person that defeats the Daleks.
See, I thought it was just because it takes her a long time to speak out loud the entirety of Harry Potter.
But yeah, it just seemed like she was still, I mean, at the end of Timeless Children, she seemed to be resolved with herself, but now because she's been arrested for something one of her previous selves did, she needs to work it out again.
Arrested for 7,000 things that her previous self did? Yeah, only 7?
Well, she's got to work out basically what happened before the Hartnell Doctor. And I mean, it seemed like she worked out when the Joe Doctor talked to her in the Matrix that, have you really been influenced that much by what you've done, what you've been before? And it's like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's probably like pull yourself together because you've got to get out of this crisis kind of thinking. And then there's a difference between like, okay, the crisis is over. I need some time to actually contemplate this and see what it really means to me.
Yeah.
She finally actually gets time to sit down and think. She's not in the middle of something, so she's in a place where nothing's going to happen to her.
Yeah.
If she wants it to.
Yeah.
That's right. Which it's funny because anyone could just sit down and think, you know, wherever they want, except the Doctor is not that kind of person at all, right? So she's not like, oh, I'll just take it easy and just do nothing for a while because stuff is always happening. So it's fascinating that she kind of piggybacks on the prison, I think, to like be like, all right, well, this is my meditation time.
Yeah, and if you're thousands of years old, I suppose it takes you decades to process
That's right.
change in your identity.
And she was still assuming that she'd come back to her companions fairly quickly after she left them off. She was planning on being back within a week of when she left them off. So she was giving herself plenty of time to process and be in the right mental state to deal with them without harming them. But then she still showed up 10 months late because, you know, the TARDIS doesn't fly right.
It likes to do these 10-month jumps, yeah.
Like
the TARDIS knew when she needed to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we think about the companions and what they were doing during that time?
I like that Yaz was basically doing the put everything up on the walls and trying to figure out where the Doctor's going to be. She's doing her police skills. But she was getting really fixated there.
I was going to say that there was a harmful nature to it, and that she was very obsessed with it to the exclusion of all else. You know, if you remember Ryan and Graham saying, you know, have you been sleeping in here? You know, it's been New Year's. When was that? You know, we don't know that it was New Year's Day when they were visiting. It could have been, you know, January 6th.
Yeah.
Like, you've been in here for 6 days and didn't even know the time passed. So
if it's January 6th, just stay in another day, really.
Right? But yeah, I thought all of them, I thought it was written in character for each of them. Because Yaz has always been the one who is most gung-ho about traveling with the Doctor. Like, that's a bad idea, let's do it.
Yeah.
I mean, she's always been that kind of companion. And Ryan actually strikes me as someone who's very thoughtful. He thinks things through a lot, and that's kind of where he came out, was, you know, maybe here is where I need to be, and doing for those around me here. Whereas and Graham was kind of in that in-between stage, both at the beginning and at the end. He's like, I really have fun, I really want to go be with the Doctor, but my family is more important to me. So again, he's kind of the in-between kind of person.
Yeah, I think that's where the 10 months really sets it up well, because in that 10 months, right, you know, they get used to not having the Doctor around, and I think Graham and Ryan basically discover that they can survive without having the Doctor around, and they learn to appreciate what they have. Whereas Yaz realizes, like, she can't live without the Doctor. So yeah, that sort of sets up the ending quite nicely, I think. Well,
and I think we also established last season that Ryan, at this point in his life, really does have more of a tie to home. You know, we went through the mental illness episode, you know, and Ryan has the one friend who's become kind of depressed and agoraphobic, who, if you remember, he was playing basketball with in Spyfall, and then, you know, his friends kind of locked up in his apartment for months afterward, and he's feeling some responsibility to look after his friend at this point. And I think after 10 months of being back on Earth and reestablishing that friendship, and he's feeling more needed back on Earth than he is in the TARDIS at this point in his life.
Yeah, I mean, I just love that moment when, like, you know, they're planting the bombs and Graham is just like, yeah, this is what we do, and he's like, this bomb, and Ryan is like, what? Please
and
answer that.
The line was, stop talking weird, Graham, but that was basically because he was trying to use the hip jargon.
Exactly, yes. Yeah,
but Ryan had definitely shown some growth here, and I think it paid off well in the story. Of all the companions, I think Ryan was really handled the best in this story, and we finally got a good Ryan story.
Yeah,
good to talk with the Doctor too, which was really nice.
Yes, and again, I think that was setting up his departure, but they had that wonderful discussion between the two of them, and she's really understanding that he has come to this different place. So when it was time to let him go, even though she was having trouble, she understood why he made the decision he did.
I loved that in that scene that he called her out and it's like, no, don't deflect. Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
I love that he's the kind of character that can do that.
And that is something we've seen with this Doctor anyway, that she, you know, I mean, granted, all the Doctors do this to some extent, but she definitely, when it gets to like the sadder and more negative feelings, she kind of buries them. And the companions have before dragged things out of her.
Well, I was thinking about when, you know, Graham is talking about his cancer to her, and she really doesn't want to engage, and it's kind of like, you know, she's basically like, I'm not that person. Like, I might look like that person, but I am not. And, you know, and yeah, I'd like, you know, and that's a bit uncomfortable, I think, because it's like she really does seem like that person, at least in this incarnation. You know, you could have this conversation with, but she just like shuts it down. Whereas here, it's kind of like, okay, well, no, we're going to have this conversation anyway. Like, not the same conversation, but like, yeah.
But I think that's consistent with the Doctor, that, you know, she's not someone who would be comfortable having this conversation, whether she's Jodie Whittaker or Peter Capaldi. He would have shut it down too, just in a different way.
He would absolutely
in a different way.
run from it. Yeah, I guess my impression was like she was much more human Doctor, right? So like I feel like she'd be more, you know, more willing to engage and more warm and sort of more kind of like a listener in a sense.
This might also be speaking to the female Doctor stuff a bit, that the audience would be making some assumptions, the humans would be making assumptions based on the fact that she is female, to have a more, whether it be maternal, but a more nurturing side. And she's pointing out, I don't have that. That's not me. Or her nurturing is in a very different way and has been through all of her incarnations. Also,
Yeah, that's right. I didn't find it particularly bad or good. It was just interesting. And I sort of think like I would say not so much that it was a doctor played by a woman, but it was more like this doctor seems much more, like she consults with her companions and stuff like that in ways other doctors hadn't and stuff like that. So, but yeah. But no, I like what they did here. Like I think it worked well.
I think more with the cancer discussion, it's kind of like going back to Matt Smith, not wanting to see Riversong injured. It's so the doctor can be rather sympathetic in some areas, but you start getting to mortality.
And David Tennant was having some difficulty with seeing Sarah Jane a bit older, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think the doctor, basically, people start talking about mortality. The doctor's like, sorry, can't relate.
Right.
I'm never going to die. So,
No, I think it's not that. I think it's more the fear of watching his companions grow older, watching her companions become ill, and like there's nothing she can do.
That's right. I mean, that's the absolute flip side of I'm not going to die. Is like I'm going to watch you die, and I don't want to do that.
Well, and I think we even can take this back to something we talked about in the season 8 panel, I think, or in the master panel, that Jo Grant, when she left, Jo Grant grew quite a bit over the 3 years she traveled with John Pertwee, and he had trouble letting her go at the end. The whole growing up thing and moving beyond him is very tough for him.
Well, in the Sarah Jane Adventures, when Matt Smith encounters both Jo Grant and Sarah Jane, but Jo did find out that the doctor had been watching over her all that time. So I mean, there's some type of balance there.
Yeah,
he doesn't really want to let them go on, but on the other hand, he's not going to actually get back in touch with them when they're as if they've moved on in their life.
Right.
So we have a question from Sebastian, who says, what do we think of the focus on the villains?
Normally I hate whenever the episodes focus from the villain's point of view. I get tired of that really fast. It's like, I just want to see how the doctor figures things out. But there would have been a big info dump otherwise if we didn't have that split off of what have they been doing, what happened, how did they get the shell and everything else. So it worked, but
yeah, I want to say that again, I've had my trouble with the Dalek stories at times, but one thing I've liked in the Chibnall era is they've gone almost for like a little bit of body horror with the Daleks now, and the voices we get with the Daleks out of their casings, the Nick's doing a very different voice for those Khaled mutants. And the whole, the Khaled mutants sort of physically taking over people a little bit and using them as puppets. It was interesting. It was a lot more interesting to me than the nonsense in the Moffat era with eye stalks popping out of people's heads and all this stuff. They were like Robo-Men, but it was very silly and childish. And this is much more gritty and realistic. This is what Daleks would do if they were out of the casing. So I've really appreciated that with these two stories, and also, there was that desperation resolution of a single Dalek trying to survive.
It's got that Planet of the Spiders thing with the spider on the back, basically.
And Chris Nothnow we've seen twice, and he's a villain, but he kind of isn't. He's just kind of an immoral human who will go with where the wind blows. But he's got the potential to be a Tobias Vaughn type if he's led down the wrong path, but at the same time, I love the bit where he and Leo are talking, and Leo's talking about having cloned this genetic material, and look what I made, and he shows them the Khaled community. Is like, are you crazy? Get rid of that thing. It's like he doesn't just embrace the aliens as allies thing. He was opportunistically siding with one of the Dalek factions in this story, but it was totally opportunistic because he's afraid of the whole situation. So
Marcia?
I agree that the Dalek puppets are super creepy. And in that sense, I like them quite well because they make a good villain. As for Robertson, I have a hard time watching him because again, a little too close to home. And I'm kind of torn, because on the one hand, I like that they're stepping a little bit away from classic Western storytelling, and that everything has a happily ever after, and everything gets wrapped up nicely, and the good guys win and the bad guys get their comeuppance. He never gets his comeuppance. This is twice now that he's not gotten his comeuppance. It has come off smelling like a rose, in fact, in a better position than he was to start. And I fully expect him to be back at some point. So on the one hand, I like that they're switching up the storytelling a little bit, because I think American audiences in particular have a hard time coping with our reality, because we're used to how stories are told. And bad guys don't always get their comeuppance, and we have to get used to that. So I like that they're doing that. But on the other hand, the story consumer in me is like, I want at least somewhere where the bad guy gets his comeuppance, because that's not how it's happening in real life. So I'm kind of torn on that character in particular. You know, I like the change in storytelling. I don't like the change in storytelling. So
yeah, I mean, I thought Robertson was like the most fun that I've had on TV in a long time. I'm just like laughing at every line. I mean, when he's like, oh my God, this is a PR disaster. I'm like, oh I'm so in for this. And when they're like confronting Leo, and he's just like, you know, where did you get the purchase order numbers? Like, is that what you're concerned about? I was like, this is nonstop hilarious. And he's just like having the most fun on TV. Like, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm all in for this. So yeah, you know, I absolutely agree with you about like the kind of like, yes, he doesn't get his comeuppance, but I'm like, yeah, don't give him a comeuppance, because we need this guy back again. Like, you know, I thought it was fantastic. Like, enjoyed the story as a whole, but man, having him every moment he's on screen, I'm laughing. So I'm just like, this really elevated it for me. What do you think about his appearance here versus in Arachnids?
I liked it a little better here, personally. Again, maybe just because it seems so topical. It felt like it slotted in really well with everything.
I think he was also more in his element here, what with all the shady dealings he was doing with the technology minister who became prime minister, and, you know, all the corporate world stuff he was involved in. It was this much more than Arachnids is him fully in his element.
Because before, when we saw him in Arachnids, he was just basically being besieged by all these strange things he wasn't familiar with, but actually having that whole lead up with him doing all that little puppet mastery behind the scenes. Yeah, that was, very timely.
And I do love how Ryan and Graham kept stringing him along on things like, what is this TARDIS thing? And why do you keep using these words? And you know.
I think this word Dalek.
I thought he was head and shoulders above his previous appearance. I thought he was a little bit overblown in Arachnids. Like the comedy's just a bit too broad there, and whereas here it was perfectly pitched, I found. So I was super happy. But I agree. I think also, I think, Mike, what you said before about, like, you know, he's not really a villain. He's sort of in this gray area kind of thing. It's the neat part about that is because you get to then put him in the TARDIS crew. And so, you know, he's not just having like a confrontation with the Doctor. He's like, well, he's on this side for half of it. And then he's like, totally betraying them to the Daleks. And like, you know, then he's, oh no, I was just a decoy. You know, it's, you know, and you kind of like, I mean, I guess it has that Trumpian thing of like, all you can do is kind of like shake your head and laugh and love the antics, you know, even as sometimes they're terrible, because what else are you going to do? So that does become quite uncomfortable. But like, you know, on the other hand, it's, this is TV, not real life. So it's, you can kind of laugh at that a bit more easily. Yeah. And so how about, what's it, the Prime Minister? I can't remember her name, Lisa Patterson, is that right?
Joe something.
Joe Patterson, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do we think of her?
It was interesting watching the evolution from she was just being the technology secretary, and
with a budget of £2.70 or whatever.
Yeah.
And the fact that she has been involved from the very beginning with the shells and setting up that poor driver who. Oh, he didn't last too long, and we got the background on him too before he vanished.
Classic Chibnall.
Yep.
You know what's really funny is because I was completely unspoiled going in, and so the driver, I actually thought, oh, this looks like they're setting up a new companion. I was like, oh, maybe some people are going to leave from the TARDIS and they'll have this guy as a new companion. So actually I didn't find it like I understand totally why people are like, oh, it was totally just like pulling on your heartstrings because they're going to kill the guy. But I actually thought they're doing real character development here. This must be a new member of the TARDIS team. So yeah.
So yeah, she was believable as somebody who could be easily swayed into grabbing for power.
Yeah, I kind of was disappointed when they killed her off because I thought, oh, she could be kind of the recurring, Harriet Jones kind of prime minister that we could see throughout a number of stories. Because I always feel, I mean, Doctor Who always does this thing of like, oh, we're going to throw in a prime minister, just like, there's another one here and so on. But I feel like where it seems to work best for me is certainly where they have, well, we're just going to commit to this one, right? Okay, now this is the prime minister and we'll just keep going for a while. So, like Harry Jones or, like various other ones that we've seen throughout the time. So I find that the prime minister of the week doesn't quite work as well for me. But... All right, so we have a question from Chameleon Voice. What about the borrowed house TARDIS idea? Is it a room on the real TARDIS or another time machine?
It is another TARDIS. Back at the end of Timeless Children, you may remember that the Doctor sent the companions and the surviving humans in another TARDIS she found on Gallifrey, which landed there in Sheffield or wherever, looking like that house. That is actually that TARDIS. And then she got her own TARDIS back later, and that's how she got back. So
she escaped in the TARDIS that landed in the shape of a tree on the planet where her TARDIS was.
Right.
And that Cybermen were invading.
Yeah.
And that borrowed house TARDIS is the one that Ryan and Graham go to find Yaz in early in the story. It is that same TARDIS. She just like she said at the end when she uses the trick, she just turns its chameleon circuit on to do this trick on Daleks.
I felt so sorry for it though.
I know. They kill off the TARDIS. Not our TARDIS, but yeah.
Thing.
Yeah, I mean, I found it very funny in Timeless Children because, like, of course that's shown in, very early in 2020, but they're like, woohoo, we're back in 2020, and you're like, no, don't let
Yes.
companions there. What a terrible place. So, yeah. Actually, I loved having the second TARDIS as like a plot device. I was totally like thrown off at the end when I was like, okay, they're bringing Daleks into the TARDIS. Okay, I'm like, oh right, it's the other TARDIS. And I'm like, is this the first time they've used the chameleon circuit as a plot device, like, I guess, to resolve a story? Like obviously, we've seen chameleon circuits used before. Is it the first time it's actually been used in a kind of plot way? And I think it might be.
The Master basically using his TARDIS chameleon circuit all the time.
Yeah, like he uses it to kind of get into the plots. I wonder if we've used it to get out of the plot. I mean, the only sort of one I'm sort of thinking of is the Valeyard's TARDIS in The Ultimate Foe, right, where they walk into the house and then it dematerializes, and you're like, oh, that was the TARDIS, but it's not a resolution in any way. Yeah, because I was like, it's an amazing idea, right? I mean, inherently built into Doctor Who, you have this shape-shifting vehicle that then you don't use, right, as a shape-shifting thing. So it's like, it was really neat to kind of like bring that in because, I guess in theory that could have been every week, like, I'll just change the TARDIS into whatever and get out of the situation that way. And of course, that's too cheap a device to use all the time. But it was really neat in this case, I thought.
And I have to say, from a nostalgia standpoint, when Ryan and Graham entered that TARDIS to see Yaz, it was the classic TARDIS door sound.
Yes.
Yeah, I love the classic feel of it. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Oh, yeah. Don was asking. He says, "I like Chris Knotts the villain. Will he be back again?" I guess there's no way to know, but I really hope so.
Yeah,
he's got to get his comeuppance at some point.
Right. I really feel like he's going to go in some sort of Tobias Vaughn type direction at some point. So, not necessarily with the Cybermen, but pairing up with some baddies for profit, and it's going to backfire on him more so than it did in this story with the Daleks.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's there's great potential in having this kind of like present day, industrialist kind of hanging around for some stories, because I think there's a lot of stories we can tell about that. Yeah. So what do we think of the Dalek design in this story?
I honestly don't really notice Dalek designs in this, or like the candy cane ones. When they had the candy coated shells back in the Matt Smith era. Unless it's a huge change like that, I kind of like, okay, it's another Dalek. Sorry.
These were skinnier and better lit. I'm seeing where the Dalek builder cosplayers are going to have a lot of fun with this one, and it's obviously going to sell some more toys. I certainly think that it looks better than things like the candy colored Daleks you were talking about. Some of the other variations they did in the Moffat era. It looks a little more modern in some ways.
You can kind of tell that Robertson was basically updating the destroyed one that the Dalek had made.
Resolution one. Yeah.
And it's just, it followed perfectly along that.
Yeah.
But of course, the original Daleks are going to say, not us.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I really liked it. I thought it was really neat. I wasn't so into the last year's Dalek, even as I understood. Yeah, okay, this is a Dalek that's just it's like that. The Doctor's sonic screwdriver. It's been assembled from what's at hand, and okay, fair enough. Of course, it's not going to look the same. So it's like I understood it, but I didn't love it. Whereas this year's Dalek, I was like, oh, I like the sleek version of that last year's Dalek. That's like, yeah, this is what happens when you streamline it. But I also at the same time I loved that the real Dalek showed up. Right. And again, having no idea what was going to happen, I was like, I wasn't actually expecting to see, proper Daleks. And it's like, right, that makes perfect sense that they start exterminating each other because Dalek purity. I was like, I'm totally on board for all this. I thought it was really well done and just felt very believable, actually. Sorry, we have a question. I just logged out of my phone for a second.
Says, what about the posted note left on the
yes.
table? The MDZ must research clue. I have to say, I don't remember this note.
I remember there was a note.
Which table are we talking about? Was this something Yaz was researching or something that Robertson had?
I think was it in Leo's lab?
Leo's lab.
Ooh.
Yeah, so clearly it didn't make an impression on me either.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember noticing the notes. Where they found the Dalek gun. Okay. Yeah, I must admit, I remember noticing it and then obviously forgetting it pretty quickly afterwards. Because I did the same thought. I was like, oh, that's setting something up. But yeah, it might be setting up something for the future.
Next year's New Year's.
Yeah, next year's New Year's special maybe. Yeah, or in 2 years' time maybe.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's nice that you get these little Easter eggs hidden around there, hinting to something in the future.
I mean, it reminded me a little bit of like Clara's post-it notes, in Dark Water, and so like we just looked, everyone is examining all the notes and being like, okay, what does this mean? And like, is she pregnant and all sorts of things. And then it was like we went nowhere with those. So it's like, yeah.
Yeah, but that's Moffat versus Chibnall, so.
Well, I think Moffat and Chibnall are equally as likely or unlikely to follow up on clues. I don't think it's an inherent thing about one or the other. Like, I mean, Moffat in some ways he would seed all these clues that would be followed up. It's just other things that look like clues weren't followed up. And so, it's like, I don't think Moffat was guilty of like never putting clues in for sure. And I think Chibnall's kind of the same. It's just like, one feels to me a bit more like a scalpel, one's a bit more like a hammer, but that's very personal taste.
It's also possible this is just a set design or prop department thing just to add some visual filler to the scene. They did a bit of that on Broadchurch. There's a lot of pink phone messages on I think David Tennant's desk or maybe Olivia Coleman's that are from various doctors and stuff. So they were working their Doctor Who references into the phone messages on Broadchurch.
Right. Nice.
They're just set dressing. That's all they are. Is they're just set dressing. You're not going to really see on camera in any great detail. The set design people had some fun.
Yeah. So what do we think? What do you think the future holds? It's the Doctor and Yaz, at least for now. Are we going to get the new companion in the very next story, or are we going to get some adventures with just Yaz for a while?
Oh,
I've been trying to avoid spoilers, but I keep seeing pictures posted. It's like, oh dear.
There's a particular monster from the past that's coming back, I think a few episodes in, and I know the new companions in that story. So it'd be interesting if they were introduced at that point and we had a few episodes with Yaz first, but I really don't know for sure.
I would, if I were writing my wish list, I'd have some episodes with just Yaz and the Doctor before bringing in a new companion, but
yeah.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I'm a showrunner looking for ratings, I'm probably going to put a big name, actor as companion in the first episode just to kind of get people watching. But if I'm, having my wish list, I would do that, but I would not have them join the TARDIS at that moment, And so, you do a sort of, Oswin idea where like, you have them, but then you don't have them for a bit and then come back. And so, yeah.
And of course, we only have 8 episodes in the new season, right? So, if you wait till episode 3 or 4, they're only in half of the season.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's true, actually. So, yeah. I mean, I've been entirely avoiding spoilers, so I know nothing, which is great. I don't even know the name of the new companion, so... Yes.
I haven't gone out of my way to find them, but I've stumbled across a few.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did like the way they handled Jack, because I've always found him rather obnoxious because he has been pushing himself on people, but because I still think it's basically because it took him so long to get to the Doctor, he actually learned patience during those 19 years and eased into. And basically, the whole idea of him talking to Yaz about what happens when the Doctor leaves you somewhere, that was so much more insightful than I ever thought he'd be.
That's true.
This Jack also is, a few hundred years older at minimum compared to what he was when he was traveling with the Doctor. Events of Torchwood, he's gone through some lifetimes.
Yeah, but how long has it been since Fugitive to Dune and now? Well 19 years, but...
Minimum 19 years,
true, but he didn't actually meet the Doctor in Fugitive, right? So...
No. But he was still that kind of manic Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. Although I think the manic Jack may be a bit more performance, especially for kind of companions and stuff like that. Yeah. But I agree. I think there's a maturity there that we haven't really seen that much of. And Kathy, I totally agree with you about he does force himself on people sometimes, and that is not okay. And and the thing is I love Jack as an idea and generally as a character, but I think if you're going to have this very attractive kind of sexually promiscuous person, you make it so that they are so attractive that people want to be with them, not that they're going to force themselves on someone. That to me is a real line in the sand. And so I absolutely get the joke of he's kissing Graham, because he thinks that Graham's a doctor and makes that assumption that everyone was making in that first season. But still, it's still really uncomfortable. And I feel like this has no place in Doctor Who, and any more than Matt Smith kissing Jenny did in the Crimson Horror.
Yeah.
Although that being said, I think there's definitely an attraction between a one-way attraction between Jack and Graham that continues into this story. I mean, he's still, when he and the Doctor pop out of the TARDIS in Yasmin's living room there or whatever, he's like, hey there, Silver Fox, and winking at him.
Graham was kind of backing away.
No, he's I agree. I think Graham is it's not like Graham is not potentially a little bit interested. It's he does not want to bite off more than he can chew. He knows that if he gives anything back, it's going to be a lot happening that he's maybe not ready for. I love that. I love the flirting. The flirting is amazing. More flirting all the time. That's excellent, and that's really what Jack is built for, right? This incredible flirting. That's awesome. And I wish they would sort of keep it to that, really. And I like that they did in this episode, and because I guess I was just really dreading that there was going to be this moment where Jack sees the Doctor and just tries to do the same thing that he did with Graham last season, because his thing is, I see the Doctor, I'm going to kiss them, whatever they look like, right? And so there's some sense in which yes, it doesn't matter what body they're in, but on the other hand, it's please don't kiss people without asking. We don't do that.
Right. One other thing I really liked about seeing Jack in this episode was that it actually made sense for him to be in this episode. Who else but Jack could spend 19 years working towards breaking the Doctor out of that Judean prison?
And then have the technology to break the Doctor out of the prison.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I know one of the things that has nominally kept them from bringing Jack back before was because what reason would we have to bring him back? What has to make sense? And I think this was a really good solution to that. Who else could have done it that way?
Yeah, I actually 100% agree, because I remember thinking about it, because you see at the end of Timeless Children that she's in the prison, and then I'm like, how is she going to get out of that? And then when I heard that Jack was coming back, I was like, oh, perfect, absolutely perfect, because you're right, there's not that many people around who can do that. I mean, I suppose if they'd said like River Song is coming back, I would have gone, okay, sure, like, she would make sense too. But there's only a very few number of individuals who are going to have the ability to break the Doctor out, and a fewer who have the interest in breaking the Doctor out. So yeah, you're right. You're down to a couple of people at that point.
And basically, Don has in the chat, I like that they circled back to, you don't know where I kept that. You don't want to know where I kept that.
Yeah, with his bracelet, yes.
Which is a reference back to the Pocket Laser Deluxe from What Not to Wear.
Yes.
Yes. I do like, too, that when he said that, the look on Jodie's face, she kind of wrinkles up her face and kind of like, ew, I don't want to think about that. Yeah.
So it was interesting, too. He was able to stash some equipment elsewhere. Was that his cell? Was that some other place? But we don't need to know.
Let's not ask too many questions about where Jack stashes things. Well, I think also, it's one thing to you pull out a gun that only you are holding. It's another thing to oh yeah, here's this bracelet that you have to now put on your skin. You're like, yeah, I think I don't want to do that. So Lucky Stark says his line about you don't get to decide when it ends was so touching, and I think that was just what Yaz needed to not keep getting too attached. Yeah, that's right. I mean, their conversation is really great, actually, and I mean, it reminds me a bit of when Jack met Martha, and David Tennant is doing something, and Martha just sort of gives this kind of longing look, and Jack turns to her and says, "Oh, you too, huh?" It's like, oh, I can really relate to these companions. I really get them.
I do worry a little bit when I'm thinking about this that there's some foreshadowing here that is Yaz going to leave the TARDIS in a good way when the time comes? Is Jack warning her of the dangers that she's facing? That she really needs to watch her back, because she might not go out on a positive note.
I love the way he just casually drops, "Oh yeah, and Rose is trapped in a parallel universe now," and Yaz is like, "What?"
Just heads up, it could end badly. Well, I think that also gives more kind of agency to Yaz's decision to stay at the end, right? Because she's not going into it blind. Like, she really has some sense of what could happen, and it's like, all right, yeah, I could end up trapped in a parallel universe, and I'm still choosing to be with the Doctor. So, it's a choice made with open eyes, I guess.
Giving her more agency.
Yes. But yeah, Mike, I agree that if you have the companions who are like, yeah, we're here for a while, then we decide we're going to be with our families or whatever and leave, versus you have the companion who's like, I'm never leaving the Doctor. You're like, okay, that's going to end badly. That is going to end with some forced separation. I guess my slight problem with that is that's so much the cliche now of almost all the new series companions before this Doctor. So with Rose and then Donna and Clara, they all had to be this oh, of course we're going to travel forever, and then it's like, okay, well, obviously that's not going to happen, so you have to break them somehow. And that's a bit unfortunate.
Well, I'm also thinking about the fact that this is Chris Chibnall as the showrunner, and I could see him playing a long game, setting up a dangerous departure for Yaz down the road, and this is just the first hint of it. I wouldn't put it past him, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
There's something about this story I did want to also point out, and it goes also back to Resolution, and that our composer Segun Akinola has come up with the most wonderful Dalek theme in these stories. It's just very dangerous sounding music, but it really fits well. And I don't think the Daleks really had a good theme song prior to this, and they kind of do now. Just as Murray Gold had a theme for Rose and a theme for the Doctor,
Yeah.
a theme for Martha, and so forth, Sagan has a theme for the Daleks now.
Oh,
And
that's
a
really
very
cool.
good theme for the Doctor
yeah.
too. I've been listening to the soundtrack over and over again.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not as tuned into music in this way, so I'm like, oh, so cool. I don't notice the music. It's just this background refrigerator noise to me. Like I noticed it, but it wasn't there. But I'm like, oh, okay, you people can pick out themes. This is amazing. I'm always in awe of this.
So I'm playing the soundtrack over and over. It's just like, it's so good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I also just in general do like that they did switch composers going into Chibnall's era. You know, Murray Gold was great, but this was 4 doctors and 2 producers he worked with, and you really needed to set a new tone for the series, and changing composers sets a different tone.
I mean, Dudley Simpson was
literally
great too,
sets a different tone.
You know, when you need to switch to Peter Howell in the 80s. So yeah, this is the reality of how things are. So we have a last comment from Loki Stark, who says, "It broke my heart that the Doctor ignored Jack bringing up Rose." A chameleon voice says, "Yes, she said nothing." So I don't know how much, like, you know, there could have been a long conversation about Rose, but you know, that's now quite a long time ago. You know, I think it's good to acknowledge, but I don't think we need to dwell on it. On the other hand, it's, I mean, I guess the Doctor moves on with different regenerations, right? And so,
was she even in the right part of the TARDIS to be part of that conversation? I thought she was off doing something else at the time and focusing on something else. I
guess that's true. Yeah.
Let's face it, there have been a lot of other companions since Rose, and there were a lot of other companions before Rose, and you know, we especially in the Russell T Davies era kept focusing on Rose well past when we should have. I think it's time to move on from Rose.
And maybe when you spend 5 billion years like trying to get back to one companion, it's like
when you're ready to break the loss of time to save Clara, Rose really doesn't matter anymore.
She's fine. She's an alternate universe.
Yeah.
All right, so we're just about out of time. Can we do our very last summing up about Revolution of the Daleks? Marcia, do you want to start?
Sure. I thought it was a lovely way to send off 2 companions in a way that made sense, gave them agency, and gave agency to the companion who remained as well. And I think I'm going to forever think of this as a companion farewell story over it being a Dalek story. And it's going to be one of my favorites in that way.
Cool. Zecca?
Yeah, what she said certainly makes sense to me. I also would like us to continue doing our Dalek stories only in specials and not in the main seasons, because I think it distracts from the arc.
I like that a lot.
Season. Yeah, and it gives a chance. You know, the thing when we were in Christmas specials is we had to have a big name guest star every time. Well, in the New Year's specials, our big name guest star is the Daleks. Boom, there you go. So
cool. Kathy?
I'm going to go with what they said. I really like this episode. I like the soundtrack. I like the way the Doctor has had a little bit more time to reflect, and really well done.
You know, one thing we didn't really speak to, which I'll just throw in, there were some wonderful little character pieces between the Doctor and the other monsters in the prison. You know, Angela.
That's true. And Bonnie and Clyde.
Where she's talking to the silent, and you know, it's like, oh, I didn't remember you were here.
The thing.
Exactly. Well, actually, that's really my summary, right? My summary is like, wow, this was fun. This was a really fun story, and I just love that. So yeah, I mean, I think Robertson really was the icing on the cake there. But like, yeah, you're right. The prison stuff and like the Harry Potter stuff, like, you know, like there's so many little pieces here that I was just like, man, this is the most fun I've had in New Year's for a while. So that was really cool. Okay, so thank you very much, my fellow panelists, and also for anyone watching. If you're currently watching this, please like this video and subscribe to the page. Console Room is happening virtually January 15th through January 17th. Find out all the things that are happening by visiting www.console-room.com. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Viva la Revolution.